The Miami sun burned gold across the horizon, its rays glinting off the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael Hudson's oceanfront mansion, a sprawling masterpiece of glass and steel perched on the edge of South Beach. The house was a monument to his success, a testament to the construction empire he'd built from a single bulldozer to a skyline-defining conglomerate that shaped cities from Miami to Manhattan. At 42, Michael was the picture of vitality, broad-shouldered with a confident stride that carried him through boardrooms and across tennis courts with equal ease. His days began before dawn, a ritual of espresso and emails followed by site visits, where he'd climb scaffolding with the ease of a man half his age, barking orders to foremen, while his sharp blue eyes missed nothing. By evening, he'd be home tossing a giggling Lizzie, his 7-year-old daughter, into the air, her laughter echoing through the marble halls. Sarah, his wife of 15 years, would watch from the kitchen island, her smile tight but present, her blonde hair catching the light as she poured wine. Their life was a polished machine, wealth, power, family running smoothly, or so Michael thought. He didn't see the cracks forming the ones that would soon shatter everything. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day where the Miami heat clung to your skin like a second shirt. Michael was behind the wheel of his Tesla, the sleek machine humming along the MacArthur Causeway, the city's skyline looming to his left, the ocean sparkling to his right. He was late for a meeting with investors, his phone buzzing with texts from his assistant about zoning permits for a new high-rise. The radio played low some jazz tune. He barely noticed his mind on the deal that could push his company past the billion-dollar mark. He didn't see the truck until it was too late. A rusted, hulking beast veering across the median, its driver slumped over, maybe drunk, maybe asleep. The impact was a deafening roar, metal screaming as the Tesla crumpled like paper. Glass exploded inward, slicing Michael's arms, his face. Sparks flew the air thick with the acrid smell of burning rubber. The world spun sky road, sky again, then darkness swallowed him whole. He woke to the sterile beep of machines, the air heavy with antiseptic. His body felt wrong, like it belonged to someone else. Tubes snaked from his arms, a ventilator hissed rhythmically, and pain throbbed in waves, dulled by drugs but never gone. He was in Jackson Memorial Hospital, the best in Miami, but no amount of money could soften the doctor's words. Mr. Hudson, the neurosurgeon, said, her voice steady but heavy, "The damage to your spinal cord is severe. T12 and L1 vertebrae are fractured. You won't walk again." Michael stared at the ceiling, the words slicing deeper than the glass had. He wanted to scream, to argue, to bargain, but his throat was raw from the ventilator he'd been on for weeks. He'd been in a coma, they told him, his body fighting to survive while his world collapsed. Sarah sat by his bed, her face pale, her eyes avoiding his. She held his hand, but it felt perfunctory, like a duty. "We'll figure it out," she said, but her voice was hollow, and Michael knew she was already pulling away. Weeks later he was discharged, not to the life he'd known, but to a new one defined by limitations. The mansion, once a symbol of triumph, felt like a prison. Its wide halls, designed for grandeur, now mocked him as he maneuvered a clunky wheelchair, its wheels catching on the edges of Persian rugs. The ocean view through those massive windows, once a source of pride, now taunted him with its untouchable freedom. Lizzie tried to adapt, her small hands pushing his chair or bringing him drawings, but her eyes held questions he couldn't answer. "When will you play soccer with me again, Daddy?" she'd ask, and he'd force a smile, muttering, "Soon, sweetheart," knowing it was a lie. Sarah, meanwhile, grew distant. She spent hours on the phone, her voice low, her bags packed with excuses about needing space. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire. She stood in the living room, her suitcase by the door. "I can't do this, Michael," she said, her voice cold but steady. "I didn't sign up for this life." She left him the divorce papers, and Lizzie walking out without a backward glance. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was louder than the crash that had broken him. Michael tried to keep his empire running. His office, a sleek corner suite in downtown Miami, was now a remote command center, its screens glowing with spreadsheets and blueprints. He'd bark orders over video calls, his voice sharp to mask the exhaustion, but his team could sense the change. The man who once strode through construction sites was now a face on a screen, his authority intact, but his fire dimmed. At home, the emptiness was worse. The mansion's staff maids, cooks, drivers moved like ghosts, their presence functional but devoid of warmth. Caregivers came and went, a revolving door of faces hired to help with Lizzie and Michael's daily needs. Some quit after a week, cowed by his sharp tongue, honed by frustration. Others couldn't handle Lizzie, who'd grown clingy, her tantrums a cry for the mother who'd left. Michael watched her from his chair, his heart aching as she curled up with her stuffed rabbit, her small body shaking with sobs. He wanted to scoop her up to run with her to the beach like he used to, but his body betrayed him, anchoring him to this new, cruel reality. The days blurred into weeks, each one a repetition of the last. Mornings began with a nurse helping him dress a humiliating ritual that left him staring at the ceiling to avoid her pitying eyes. He'd wheel to his home office, a converted study lined with awards and photos of a life that no longer existed. He'd work until his eyes burned, negotiating deals, approving designs, anything to keep the company alive, to prove he was still Michael Hudson, not just a man in a chair. But the effort was hollow. At night, when Lizzie was asleep, he'd sit by the windows, the ocean's rhythm, a cruel reminder of time marching on without him. He'd pour a glass of bourbon, though the doctors warned against it, and let the burn in his throat distract from the emptiness in his chest. The empire he'd built, the wealth he'd amassed, it meant nothing now. He was a king in a crumbling castle, his daughter, the only light in the darkness, but even she couldn't fill the void left by his broken body and broken marriage. The mansion's elevator installed for his wheelchair hummed softly as it carried him between floors, a constant reminder of his dependency. He hated it, hated the pity in the eyes of delivery drivers, the awkward pauses in conversations with old friends who didn't know what to say. He'd always been the man who fixed things, crises at work, fights with Sarah Lizzie's scraped knees, but now he couldn't fix himself. The accident had taken more than his legs. It had stripped him of purpose, of identity. He'd catch glimpses of himself in mirrors, his once strong frame now gaunt, his face lined with pain and sleepless nights. Lizzie would climb onto his lap, her warmth a fleeting comfort, but even her love couldn't drown out the voice in his head that whispered he was failing her. He'd built skyscrapers that touched the clouds, but now he couldn't even stand to hug his daughter. The weight of that truth pressed harder each day, and as the Miami nights grew longer, Michael Hudson, the man who'd conquered cities, began to wonder if he'd ever conquer this. The Hudson mansion stood like a silent sentinel against the Miami skyline, its glass walls reflecting the restless churn of the Atlantic. Inside, the air was heavy with routine, a mechanical rhythm of beeping monitors and the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen, where the staff prepared meals Michael barely touched. The house, once alive with laughter and movement, now felt like a museum, its grandeur preserved but lifeless. Michael Hudson, confined to his wheelchair, spent his days tethered to a home office lined with monitors that glowed with the pulse of his construction empire. He'd bark orders through video calls, his voice sharp, to mask the fatigue that clung to him like damp heat. But the fire that once drove him was flickering, replaced by a gnawing emptiness that no deal or dollar amount could fill. Lizzie, his 7-year-old daughter, was the only tether to his old self, her crayons and stuffed animals a splash of color in the sterile mansion. Yet even she was fading, her smiles rare, her eyes searching for a mother who wasn't coming back. The revolving door of caregivers, some too timid, others too detached, had done little to ease the strain. Michael needed help, but he'd built his life on self-reliance, and every new face felt like a reminder of his failure. Then came Aisha Johnson. She arrived on a humid morning, her sneakers squeaking softly on the marble floor as she stepped into the mansion, a backpack slung over one shoulder. She was young, maybe 25, with a wiry frame and deep brown eyes that held a quiet intensity. Her hair was pulled back in a neat braid, and her smile, though small, carried a warmth that seemed out of place in the cold expanse of the house. She wasn't like the others with their clinical efficiency or nervous deference. Aisha had a presence steady, unapologetic, like she'd walked through storms and come out stronger. She'd been hired through an agency, a temporary fix to care for Lizzie and assist Michael. But her resume told a story: a nursing student at the University of Miami working nights to pay tuition, raised in Liberty City, where grit was a way of life. Michael barely glanced at her when she introduced herself, his eyes fixed on a spreadsheet. "Just do your job, and don't bother me," he muttered, his voice edged with the bitterness that had become his armor. Aisha nodded unfazed and turned to Lizzie, who was sprawled on the floor with a coloring book, her small face tight with distrust. From the start, Aisha was different. She didn't hover over Michael with pity or tiptoe around his temper. With Lizzie, she was patient but firm, kneeling to meet the girl's eyes, asking about her drawings, with a curiosity that coaxed out shy giggles. She'd braid Lizzie's hair, weaving in bright beads that clicked softly, and soon the girl was trailing her like a shadow, chattering about her stuffed rabbit's adventures. Michael noticed but didn't care. At least that's what he told himself. He didn't have the energy for another caregiver, another stranger who'd quit when his frustration boiled over, or when Lizzie's tantrums grew too wild. Yet Aisha stayed her presence a quiet constant, like the hum of the ocean beyond the windows. She'd bring him coffee without being asked, setting it on his desk with a simple, "You look like you need this." He'd grunt in response, but the gesture lingered a crack in his defenses he didn't want to admit. One afternoon, as rain lashed the windows, Aisha found Michael in his office, staring at a photo of himself and Lizzie on a beach, his legs strong, his smile wide. The man in the picture felt like a stranger. "You miss that guy, don't you?" Aisha said, her voice soft but direct. Michael's jaw tightened. "Don't touch me," he snapped, wheeling away from her. "I don't need your pity." Aisha didn't flinch. "Good, 'cause I'm not offering any," she said, crossing her arms. "But I'm not blind either. You're giving up, and that's not doing Lizzie any good." Her words hit like a slap, sharp and unyielding. Michael wanted to fire her on the spot, but something in her eyes, fearless, like she saw past his broken body to the man still inside, stopped him. She didn't wait for his response, just turned and left, leaving the air charged with her challenge. Aisha started small, ignoring Michael's protests. She'd wheel him to the mansion's gym, a space he'd avoided since the accident, its treadmills and weights mocking his useless legs. "Just try," she'd say, guiding his hands to a resistance band. He'd curse under his breath, his muscles trembling with effort. But Aisha was relentless, her voice a steady anchor. "You're not done yet, Michael. Not even close." She shared stories as they worked, her voice weaving through the strained stories of her brother, who'd lost a leg in a car accident, but learned to walk with a prosthetic of her mother, who'd worked double shifts to keep their family afloat. "We don't quit where I come from," she said one day, her eyes locking on his. "And I don't think you're a quitter either." Michael didn't respond, but her words burrowed deep, stirring something he thought he'd lost. The exercises grew harder each session, a battle against pain and doubt. Aisha was there every step, adjusting his wheelchair, spotting his movements, her hands steady but never intrusive. She'd catch his eye when he managed a new motion, lifting an arm higher, gripping a weight, and her nod was worth more than any applause. Lizzie started joining them, her laughter a balm as she'd cheer, "Go, Daddy," while stacking foam blocks nearby. The mansion began to change its silence, broken by the clink of weights, the hum of Aisha's old-school R&B playlist, the chatter of Lizzie's stories. Michael felt it a spark, faint but real, like a muscle waking after a long sleep. His fingers, once clumsy, began to obey again, and one day he lifted a glass without spilling a victory so small it shouldn't have mattered, but it did. He looked at Aisha, expecting her usual nod, but she grinned wide and unguarded. "Told you," she said, and for the first time in months, Michael almost smiled. Aisha's bond with Lizzie grew stronger too. She'd take the girl to the mansion's pool, teaching her to float, while Michael watched from the deck, his heart twisting at the sight of his daughter's joy. Aisha would read to her at night, her voice soft, as she spun tales of princesses who fought their own battles. Lizzie stopped asking about Sarah as often, her trust in Aisha a quiet anchor. Michael saw it the way Aisha filled a void he couldn't, and it both comforted and shamed him. He'd watch them from his office, Lizzie's head on Aisha's shoulder, and feel a pang of something he couldn't name, gratitude maybe, or something deeper. But he pushed it down, afraid to let it take root. He'd lost too much to believe in anything lasting. Yet Aisha was changing him too. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of coral, she wheeled him to the terrace, the air thick with salt and possibility. "You're stronger than you think," she said, her voice low. "Not just here," she tapped his arm, "but here." She pointed to his chest. Michael looked away, the ocean blurring in his vision. He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the spark she'd lit was growing, and he couldn't deny it. For the first time since the accident, he felt the faint pulse of hope, not for his legs, not yet, but for something more. Aisha didn't see a broken man. She saw Michael Hudson, and that was enough to make him wonder if he could be that man again. The Hudson mansion, perched on the edge of Miami's South Beach, was no longer the hollow shell it had been. Its marble halls, once silent, now hummed with life. Lizzie's laughter, the faint rhythm of Aisha's R&B playlist, the clink of weights in the gym, where Michael Hudson pushed his body against its limits. Months had passed since Aisha Johnson arrived, her presence a steady current pulling Michael and his 7-year-old daughter from the depths of despair. Michael's arms were stronger now, his grip firm, his shoulders broader from relentless therapy sessions guided by Aisha's unwavering resolve. He could maneuver his wheelchair with precision, navigating the mansion's wide corridors without the frustration that once consumed him. His home office, a fortress of glowing screens and blueprints, buzzed with renewed energy as he led his construction empire with a spark of his old fire. But it wasn't just his body waking up, it was his spirit. Aisha saw him, not the millionaire in a wheelchair, but the man who'd built cities, the father who'd do anything for his daughter. And Lizzie, with her crayons and boundless energy, was blooming, her smiles brighter, her tantrums fewer, thanks to Aisha's warmth. The gym had become their sanctuary, a sunlit space where sweat and determination drowned out the past. Aisha pushed Michael harder each day, her voice a blend of encouragement and challenge. "One more rep. Michael, "You've got this," she'd say, her brown eyes steady as he grunted through the pain, his muscles burning. She'd kneel beside him, adjusting his form, her hands quick but never lingering, respecting the boundaries he'd set with his sharp, "Don't touch me," months ago. Yet those boundaries were crumbling. When he managed to lift a heavier weight or hold a stretch longer, Aisha's grin lit up the room, and Michael found himself chasing that look, a quiet victory that meant more than any contract. Lizzie would join them, her small hands clapping as she cheered, "Go, Daddy," before racing off to build a tower of foam blocks. The mansion felt alive again, its walls echoing with a warmth Michael hadn't known since before the accident that stole his legs. Outside the gym, their bond grew in softer moments. Evenings found them on the terrace, the Miami sky ablaze with sunset, the ocean whispering below. Aisha would push Michael's chair to the edge, Lizzie perched on his lap, her head resting against his chest, as Aisha told stories, not fairy tales but real ones, about her childhood in Liberty City, where she'd learned to find joy in small things like her mother's Sunday gumbo, or her brother's stubborn fight to walk again after his own accident. Michael listened, his usual defenses down, drawn to her resilience. One night, as Lizzie dozed, Aisha looked at him, her voice low. "You're not just surviving, Michael. You're living. Don't forget that." He met her gaze, his throat tight, and for a moment the world felt right. Him, Lizzie, Aisha, a fragile but real family forming in the cracks of his broken life. But the past has a way of clawing back. It arrived on a humid afternoon, the kind where the air clung like a second skin. Michael was in his office reviewing plans for a new downtown tower when the intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Hudson is here," the maid said, her voice hesitant. Michael froze. Sarah, his ex-wife who'd walked out a year ago leaving divorce papers and a broken-hearted Lizzie. He wheeled to the living room, his jaw set, and there she was, Sarah, polished and cold, her blonde hair sleek, her designer suit screaming money. Beside her stood a man in a crisp suit, his briefcase a quiet threat. "Michael," Sarah said, her voice smooth, but edged, "we need to talk." Lizzie, playing nearby, froze, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. Aisha, who'd been helping Lizzie with a puzzle, stood quietly, her presence a steady anchor. Sarah didn't waste time. She wanted custody of Lizzie, claiming Michael's condition made him unfit. "She needs stability, a mother," Sarah said, her eyes flicking to Aisha with disdain. "Not a nanny playing house." The words cut. But worse was her second demand, a stake in Michael's company, a slice of the empire she'd abandoned. "I'm entitled," she said, her lawyer nodding. "We can settle this quietly, or we can go to court. Your choice." Michael's hands clenched the arms of his wheelchair, his voice low but fierce. "You left us, Sarah. You don't get to waltz back and take her." The room crackled with tension, Lizzie's small whimper breaking the silence. Aisha stepped forward, guiding Lizzie away, but Michael saw the strain in her eyes, the weight of being caught in a fight, not hers. The threat lingered like a storm cloud. Sarah and her lawyer left, promising to return with legal papers. Michael retreated to his office, his mind racing. He'd fought for his company, his daughter, his life. But this was different. Sarah's wealth and connections could drag them through a brutal court battle, one that might scar Lizzie forever. He wheeled to the gym, needing to move to feel something other than fear. Aisha was there, setting up equipment, her movements calm, but her face tight. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft. He shook his head, the truth spilling out. She could take her, Aisha. I can't lose Lizzie. For the first time, he let her see his fear raw and unfiltered. Aisha knelt beside him, her hand hovering but not touching. "You won't lose her," she said. "You're her father. You've fought harder battles than this." Her words steadied him, but doubt gnawed at his core. That night, Aisha made a decision that shook him. She found him on the terrace, the city lights glittering below. "I'm leaving Michael," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes wet. "I'm not family. I'm making this messier for you and Lizzie. Sarah's using me as an excuse, and I won't be the reason you lose her." Michael's heart lurched. "You're not the problem," he said, his voice rough. "You're the reason we're still standing." But Aisha shook her head, her braid swaying. "I care about you both too much to stay in the way." She turned to go, and Michael felt the air leave the room. He'd lost so much: his legs, his wife, his old life. But losing Aisha felt like losing the spark that kept him fighting. He wheeled after her, his voice breaking. "Don't do this, Aisha. We need you." She paused, her back to him, and for a moment the silence held everything: hope, fear, the fragile bond they'd built. The days that followed were heavy. Aisha stayed, but her presence was quieter, as if she were already halfway gone. Michael threw himself into work, meeting with lawyers, preparing for a fight he wasn't sure he could win. He'd sit with Lizzie at night, reading her stories, her small hand in his, and vow to protect her no matter the cost. But Sarah's shadow loomed, her threats a constant hum in his mind. Aisha kept up their routine therapy meals, bedtime stories, but Michael saw the strain in her, the way she avoided his eyes. He'd catch her watching Lizzie, her smile tinged with sadness, and it hit him she wasn't just a caregiver. She was part of them, part of him. The thought terrified him, not because it was new, but because it was true. As Miami's neon nights pulsed outside, Michael knew he was at a crossroads. He could let Aisha walk away, let Sarah tear his world apart again, or he could fight not just for Lizzie, but for the life they were building, the one Aisha had made possible. The Miami skyline shimmered under a late afternoon sun, its glass towers catching the light like a promise of tomorrow. Inside the Hudson mansion, the air was thick with anticipation, a quiet hum that hadn't existed since before the accident that had shattered Michael Hudson's life. The mansion, once a cold monument to his wealth, now pulsed with warmth. Lizzie's drawings taped to the fridge, Aisha's old radio playing soulful tunes in the kitchen, the faint creak of Michael's wheelchair as he moved with purpose. He was stronger now, his arms sculpted from months of grueling therapy, his spirit rekindled by Aisha Johnson's relentless faith. The gym sessions, the late-night talks, the laughter that filled the halls, they'd woven a fragile but real family out of Michael, his 7-year-old daughter Lizzie, and Aisha, the caregiver who'd defied his "don't touch me" to become his lifeline. But the shadow of Sarah, his ex-wife, loomed large. Her demands for custody of Lizzie and a share of his construction empire hung over them like a storm ready to break. Aisha's decision to leave to spare Michael and Lizzie the chaos of a legal battle had left a crack in their newfound harmony, and Michael felt the weight of it in every quiet moment. He couldn't let her go. Not Aisha, who'd seen past his broken body to the man he could still be. Not when Lizzie's laughter, so rare after Sarah left, now rang through the house because of Aisha's care. Michael spent sleepless nights in his office, the glow of his monitors casting shadows as he strategized with lawyers poring over contracts and custody laws. He'd built skyscrapers, negotiated deals worth billions, but this fight felt bigger. Lizzie's future, Aisha's place in their lives, his own redemption. He'd catch glimpses of Aisha, with Lizzie braiding her hair or reading bedtime stories, and the sight tightened his chest. She was pulling back, her smiles restrained, her bags half-packed in her room. "I'm not your family," she'd said that night on the terrace, her voice steady but her eyes betraying her pain. Michael knew she was wrong. She was more than family. She was the spark that had brought them back to life. The turning point came with an event Michael couldn't avoid: a press conference at the Miami Convention Center, where he was set to unveil plans for a new skyscraper, a sleek tower that would redefine the city's skyline. The room was packed: reporters, investors, city officials, their eyes on the man who'd once been Miami's unstoppable force. Michael wheeled onto the stage, his suit sharp, his jaw set, but his mind wasn't on the blueprints projected behind him. The crowd hushed as he spoke, his voice steady, as he outlined the project's scope: sustainable design community, impact, a legacy for Miami. But then he paused, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, and the room felt the shift. "This tower," he said, "is about building something that lasts. But I've learned there's something more important than steel and glass." The audience leaned in, cameras flashing. Michael's voice softened, but it carried a strength that filled the space. "A year ago, I lost everything. My legs, my wife, my sense of who I was. I thought I was done. But someone saw me when I couldn't see myself. She gave me back my fight, my daughter's smile, my reason to keep going." He looked out, finding Aisha in the wings, her eyes wide, her hands clasped tight. "Her name is Aisha Johnson," he said, his voice catching. "She's not just a caregiver. She's the reason I'm here, not just on this stage, but alive. And I'm asking her right now to stay, not as an employee, but as part of us, part of our family. Aisha, we need you. I need you." The room erupted in murmurs, cameras swiveling to catch Aisha's stunned expression. She stood frozen, tears glinting in her eyes, as Lizzie, who'd been sitting with a family friend in the front row, broke free and ran to her, wrapping her arms around Aisha's waist. "Don't go," Lizzie whispered loud enough for the mics to catch, and the crowd's murmurs turned to applause, a wave of warmth that crashed over the room. Sarah was there too, in the back, her face unreadable. She'd come with her lawyer, expecting to corner Michael after the event to press her demands. But as she watched Lizzie cling to Aisha, saw the way Michael's eyes never left them, something shifted. The crowd's reaction, the raw honesty of Michael's words, stripped away her leverage. She'd left them in their darkest moment, and now, seeing the family they'd become without her, she faltered. Her lawyer whispered something, but she shook her head, her posture softening. Later, in a quiet meeting room, she agreed to drop her custody claim and her demand for a share of the company. "I just want what's best for Lizzie," she said, her voice clipped but resigned. Michael nodded, no anger left, only relief. Sarah left Miami the next day, her shadow lifting like a fog burned off by the sun. Back at the mansion, the air felt lighter, the ocean's rhythm a song of renewal. Aisha stayed. She unpacked her bags, her smile returning as she and Lizzie danced in the kitchen to an old Motown track. Michael watched them, his heart full in a way he hadn't thought possible. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold, they sat on the terrace, Michael, Aisha, Lizzie between them. Lizzie looked up at Aisha, her eyes bright. "Are you staying forever?" she asked. Aisha laughed, brushing a braid from Lizzie's face. "As long as you'll have me, kiddo." Lizzie grinned, then turned to Michael, her small hand in his. "Daddy is Aisha, our family now." Michael met Aisha's eyes, his voice steady. "Yes, sweetheart, she is." Lizzie hugged Aisha tight, whispering "Mom" so softly it was almost lost in the ocean's hum, but it landed like a stone in Michael's chest, heavy with joy. The journey hadn't been easy, and it wasn't over. Michael still faced therapy pain days when doubt crept in. But he'd learned something vital, a lesson carved into the core of him: strength isn't just in standing tall or building empires. It's in accepting help, in leaning on those who see you, in fighting for the people who make life worth living. Aisha had taught him that not with words, but with her stubborn refusal to let him give up. She'd come into their lives as a stranger, defying his walls, and stayed to become their heart. The lesson was clear: no one rebuilds alone. It takes connection. Trust the courage to let someone in when the world feels broken. For Michael, that meant Aisha Lizzie, a family forged not by blood, but by choice. As the stars emerged over Miami, Michael looked at his daughter, at Aisha, and felt a truth settle in his bones. Life had broken him, but it had also given him a second chance, not to walk, not yet, but to live fully, to love fiercely. He'd built towers that touched the sky, but this family, this moment, was his greatest creation. And as Lizzie's laughter mingled with the ocean's song, he knew he'd fight to protect it every day, for as long as he had breath. The world could take his legs, his wealth, his past, but it couldn't take this. This was his forever.